In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there is only war, few forces inspire as much dread as the approaching rumble of an Ork WAAAGH. The galaxy has witnessed countless horrors, the soul-devouring predations of chaos, the silent hunger of the Tyranid high fleets, the awakening of ancient Necron tomb worlds. Yet among these existential threats, the Orks hold a unique position, a species seemingly designed for war, finding purpose and joy in violence, and capable of overwhelming entire sectors through sheer numbers and brutality. The Orks are not merely another Xenos threat. They are a force of nature, a green tide that rises without warning, sweeping across star systems with unrelenting ferocity. Their WAAAGH, both a battle cry and a psychic phenomenon, represents one of the most primal and terrifying manifestations of warfare in the galaxy. It is a collective surge of violence that transforms disorganized bands of greenskins into a cohesive, planet-crushing engine of destruction. This article delves into the heart of the green tide, exploring the origins, mechanics, and devastating impact of the Ork WAAAGH. From the biological peculiarities that make Orks the perfect warriors to the psychic field that empowers their crude technology, from legendary war bosses who have brought the Imperium to its knees to the aftermath of worlds touched by their savage presence, we will examine what makes the WAAAGH one of the most feared phenomena in the Warhammer 40K universe. For in understanding the WAAAGH, we understand a fundamental truth of the 40K setting, that war is not merely a means to an end, but for some, it is the end itself, a purpose, a religion, and a way of life all rolled into one violent, thunderous charge. The Orks are a paradox of simplicity and complexity. At first glance, they appear to be nothing more than brutish, green-skinned barbarians with a primitive culture centered around violence. Their society lacks the technological sophistication of the Tau, the ancient grandeur of the Eldar, or the industrial might of the Imperium. Yet this surface-level assessment belies the true nature of these Xenos warriors, who represent one of the most successful and widespread species in the galaxy. Orks were engineered for war, created millions of years ago by the now extinct Old Ones as living weapons against the Necrontyr and Satan. These Krorks were designed with remarkable biological adaptations. Even in their degraded form as modern Orks, they retain these traits. They grow larger and stronger through combat. They can survive grievous injuries that would kill other species. And most remarkably, they reproduce through spores that are released upon death, ensuring that any world touched by Orks will face recurring infestations for generations. Their culture, if it can be called such, revolves entirely around conflict. Orks believe that might makes right, with the strongest among them naturally rising to leadership positions. Their technology, while appearing ramshackle and unreliable, functions through a combination of rudimentary engineering and the subconscious psychic field they generate. Their language is simple yet expressive, dominated by terms related to warfare. Even their religion centers around two war gods, Gork, who is brutally cunning, and Mork, who is cunningly brutal. In this context, the WAAAGH emerges not as an aberration, but as the natural culmination of Orkish existence, the highest expression of their purpose. The Orks are a paradox of simplicity and complexity. At first glance, they appear to be nothing more than brutish, green-skinned barbarians with a primitive culture centered around violence. Their society lacks the technological sophistication of the Tau, the ancient grandeur of the Eldar, or the industrial might of the Imperium. Yet this surface-level assessment belies the true nature of these Xenos warriors, who represent one of the most successful and widespread species in the galaxy. Orks were engineered for war. Created millions of years ago by the now extinct Old Ones as living weapons against the Necrontyr and Catan, these Orks were designed with remarkable biological adaptations. Even in their degraded form as modern Orks, they retain these traits. They grow larger and stronger through combat. They can survive grievous injuries that would kill other species, and most remarkably, they reproduce through spores that are released upon death, ensuring that any world touched by Orks will face recurring infestations for generations. Their culture, if it can be called such, revolves entirely around conflict. Orks believe that might makes right, with the strongest among them naturally rising to leadership positions. Their technology, while appearing ramshackle and unreliable, functions through a combination of rudimentary engineering and the subconscious psychic field they generate. Their language is simple yet expressive, dominated by terms related to warfare. Even their religion centers around two war gods, Gork, who is brutally cunning, and Mork, who is cunningly brutal. In this context, the WAAAGH emerges not as an aberration, but as the natural culmination of Orkish existence, the highest expression of their purpose. A WAAAGH does not begin with a declaration of war or a formal mustering of troops. It starts with a feeling, a psychic resonance that travels through Ork communities, drawing them toward a powerful leader. This call to war manifests as a restlessness, an aggression that can only be sated through conquest. As Orks respond to this call, they form increasingly larger groups. Small bands of boys join together under Nobs, noble Orks, who themselves pledge allegiance to powerful war bosses. These war bosses compete and fight amongst themselves until one emerges victorious, usually the largest, most aggressive, and most charismatic among them. This dominant Ork becomes the warlord, the focal point of the WAAAGH. The gathering stage of a WAAAGH is characterized by escalating violence. Orks fight amongst themselves as much as against external foes, a process that weeds out the weak and establishes a hierarchy based on strength. This internal conflict, rather than fragmenting the Orks, actually strengthens them as a whole. The survivors grow tougher, the leadership becomes more defined, and a primitive form of organization emerges. Few names inspire as much dread in Imperial citizens as Ghazghkull Thraka. This towering figure stands as perhaps the most dangerous Ork warlord in the galaxy. A brutal strategist who has united countless tribes under his banner and launched some of the largest WAAAGHs in recent history. His story represents the apex of what an Ork can achieve and demonstrates how a single exceptional leader can transform the green tide from a chaotic mass into a galaxy-spanning threat. Ghazghkull's rise to power began unremarkably. Born on the industrial world of Ork, he was initially just another Ork boy in the tribe of warlord Urgluk. What set him apart was an injury that would change the course of his life and potentially the galaxy. After suffering a head wound from a bolter round, Ghazghkull was treated by a pain boy who replaced part of his skull with a metal plate. Following this crude surgery, Ghazghkull began experiencing visions of the Ork gods, Gork and Mork. These visions transformed Ghazghkull from a common warrior into a prophet. He claimed that the gods had chosen him to lead the greatest WAAAGH in history, to unite all Orks under his command, and to conquer the galaxy in the name of Gork and Mork. In a society where strength determines leadership, Ghazghkull's newfound religious fervor was backed by increasing physical size and prowess. He challenged and killed warlord Urgluk, taking control of the tribe and beginning his path to domination. What makes Ghazghkull exceptional among orcs is not just his size or strength, but his peculiar form of cunning. While most orc leaders think only in terms of the next battle, Ghazghkull has demonstrated a capacity for long-term planning that borders on strategic genius. He unites tribes not just through violence, but through his charismatic leadership and religious authority as the prophet of the WAAAGH. This combination of brute force and primitive charisma has allowed him to maintain control over forces that would fragment under lesser warlords. Ghazghkull's name became infamous throughout the Imperium during the Second War for Armageddon in 941 M41. This vital hive world, with its massive industrial output and strategic location, became the target of Ghazghkull's first major WAAAGH. The invasion caught the Imperial defenders by surprise, as few could have predicted the level of coordination and strategic acumen displayed by the Ork forces. Under Ghazghkull's leadership, the Orks seized half the planet within weeks. They might have conquered it entirely, if not for the brilliant defensive strategies of Commissar Sebastian Yarrick, who became Ghazghkull's nemesis and worthy opponent. After a bitter, bloody conflict lasting several years, Imperial reinforcements finally drove the Orks back, but not before they had inflicted catastrophic damage on the planet's infrastructure and population. Most Ork warlords, having been defeated, would either die in battle or retreat to lick their wounds. Ghazghkull did neither. Instead, he withdrew in a relatively organized fashion, preserving much of his force. He spent the next decades consolidating his power, absorbing other tribes, and preparing for his return. This patient approach, almost un-Ork-like in its restraint, demonstrated Ghazghkull's exceptional nature. The Third War for Armageddon, beginning in 998 M41, showed how much Ghazghkull had grown in power and cunning. His second WAAAGH was vastly larger than the first, comprising thousands of ships and millions of orcs. The invasion was preceded by the destruction of Armageddon's space defenses and featured complex strategies such as the use of attack moons, hollowed-out asteroids converted into massive battle stations. This time, not even the return of Yarrick could fully stem the green tide. What made this campaign truly remarkable was that Armageddon wasn't Ghazghkull's ultimate goal. After establishing a significant presence on the planet, he departed with a substantial portion of his forces, leaving his subordinates to continue the fight. Imperial analysts later realized that Armageddon had served as both a testing ground for his strategies and a distraction for Imperial forces, while he pursued objectives elsewhere in the galaxy. In the years following the Third War for Armageddon, Ghazghkull's power has only grown. With each battle, with each world conquered, he grows physically larger and stronger, his mind becoming sharper and more focused on his divine mission. Some Imperial scholars now compare him to the Beast of Ullanor, a legendary Ork warlord from millennia past, who nearly brought the Imperium to its knees during the War of the Beast. What makes Ghazghkull truly dangerous is his evolving understanding of warfare. He has learned from both victories and defeats, adapting his strategies accordingly. He has displayed an unprecedented ability to coordinate actions across multiple star systems, launching simultaneous attacks that divide Imperial responses. He has shown patience in building his forces before striking, ensuring overwhelming numerical superiority when he does attack. Reports from the front lines of systems facing his WAAAGH describe not just a typical Orkish horde, but an invasion force with discernible structure. Vanguard forces of speed freaks and commandos scout and disrupt enemy positions. Massive formations of boys provide the hammer, while specialized units like Meganobs and Def Dreads serve as the anvil, supporting artillery and air power suppress defensive positions. Behind this front line, Mech Boys establish crude but effective production facilities, churning out more weapons and vehicles to feed the war machine. This is not to say that Ghazghkull has transformed the Orks into a disciplined military force comparable to the Imperial Guard or Space Marines. The essential nature of the Orks remains unchanged. They still revel in violence, fight amongst themselves, and charge headlong into battle with little regard for casualties. But under Ghazghkull's leadership, this chaotic energy is channeled more effectively, making his WAAAGH arguably the most dangerous Orkish threat the galaxy has faced in millennia. As Ghazghkull continues his crusade across the stars, one question looms in the minds of Imperial commanders. Is this simply an exceptionally successful Ork warlord? Or are they witnessing the emergence of something more? Perhaps the prophesied return of the prime Orks, the restoration of the Krork to their original terrifying form. Only time will tell, but for now, the green tide rises higher with each passing year, and at its crest stands Ghazghkull Thraka, the prophet of the WAAAGH. As the WAAAGH gains momentum, it attracts not only fighters, but specialist Orks as well. Mech Boys bring their mechanical expertise, constructing crude but effective war machines. Pain Boys provide medical care, though their understanding of anatomy is questionable at best. Weird Boys channel the growing psychic energy of the WAAAGH, their powers increasing with the size of the Ork horde. Commandos, speed freaks, flash gits, and other specialized units join the growing force, each adding their unique skills to the war effort. By the time a WAAAGH reaches critical mass, it has transformed from a collection of disparate tribes into a primitive empire dedicated to a single purpose: war on a scale few other species can comprehend. What makes the WAAAGH truly unique among military movements is its nature as both a physical and psychic phenomenon. As millions of Orks gather under a single banner, their latent psychic abilities combine to create what is known as the WAAAGH field, a powerful aura that enhances every aspect of Orkish warfare. This field strengthens the Orks physically, allowing them to shrug off wounds that would kill other beings. It empowers their crude technology, making ramshackle vehicles and cobbled-together weapons function far more effectively than their construction would suggest. Most significantly, it affects the Orks mentally, creating a rudimentary form of collective consciousness that enables levels of cooperation normally impossible for such an aggressive and independent-minded species. The WAAAGH field grows stronger with the size of the Ork force and the intensity of their emotions. In the largest warlords, this psychic energy manifests in visible ways. Strange green lightning crackling around Ork war machines, weapons firing with impossible power, vehicles moving faster than their engines should allow. Weird Boys, already conduits for Orkish psychic energy, can become living weapons in the midst of a WAAAGH, channeling the excess energy into devastating psychic attacks. This combination of numbers, aggression, and psychic amplification makes the WAAAGH more than just an army. It is a force of nature, a green tide that crashes against the shores of civilization with unstoppable momentum. Imperial scholars and elder seers alike have noted that a full-fledged WAAAGH shares characteristics with warp storms and other cosmic phenomena, suggesting that at its peak, an Ork invasion transcends conventional warfare entirely. It is this transcendent quality that makes the WAAAGH so terrifying to those who stand in its path. They face not merely an enemy army, but a manifestation of war itself. Millions of green-skinned warriors, empowered by their collective psychic field, driven by an instinctual love of battle, and led by the biggest, meanest orc of them all. For certain specialized orcs, the effects are even more pronounced. Weird boys, who serve as living conduits for this psychic energy, find their powers greatly enhanced during a WAAAGH. They can unleash devastating psychic attacks, teleport groups of orcs across the battlefield, or even summon manifestations of the orc gods. However, this power comes with risk. Weird boys who cannot channel the energy properly may literally explode from the psychic pressure, taking nearby orcs with them. The combination of overwhelming numbers and psychic amplification creates a military force with unique characteristics. A WAAAGH in full swing possesses a momentum that makes it nearly impossible to halt through conventional means. Like an avalanche gathering speed and mass as it descends, the WAAAGH grows more powerful with each victory, drawing in more orcs and strengthening the psychic field that binds them together. This momentum manifests in several ways. On the battlefield, orc forces display a fearlessness that borders on suicidal by human standards. They charge into enemy fire, absorbing catastrophic casualties without breaking. Indeed, the sight of their fellows being cut down often only enrages surviving orcs, spurring them to fight with even greater ferocity. This psychological resilience, combined with their physical toughness, means that orc advances frequently overwhelm defenders through sheer attrition. Strategically, the momentum of a WAAAGH is equally difficult to counter. Unlike human armies, which might be demoralized by defeats or logistical problems, orcs remain focused on their goal regardless of setbacks. The loss of thousands or even millions of orcs is not seen as a defeat, but simply as part of the process of finding worthy opponents. As long as the warlord leading the WAAAGH survives, the green tide continues to flow. Even killing the warlord is not always sufficient to stop a WAAAGH. While the death of the leader typically leads to fragmentation as subordinates fight for dominance, this process often results in multiple smaller WAAAGHs rather than a complete dissolution of the orcish presence. These splinter forces may lack the cohesion of the original WAAAGH, but they remain dangerous and unpredictable threats that can plague a region for years or decades. The only sure way to stop a war is to eliminate the vast majority of the orc population in a region, a task that is practically impossible given their reproductive method. Orcs release spores throughout their lives and especially upon death, which eventually grow into new orcs. A world that has experienced an orc invasion remains contaminated, with new orcs emerging from the soil for generations, unless the most extreme decontamination measures are employed. This biological persistence, combined with their psychic cohesion and numerical advantage, makes the WAAAGH one of the most formidable military phenomena in the galaxy. It is not merely an army but a force of nature, green lightning in a bottle, directed toward a single purpose: war without end. To the casual observer, orc warfare appears to be nothing more than mindless violence. A green horde charging forward without strategy or forethought, relying solely on numbers and brute strength to overwhelm their enemies. This perception is not entirely inaccurate, as orcs do indeed favor direct, brutal approaches to combat. However, dismissing orcish tactics as mere savagery is a dangerous underestimation that has led many Imperial commanders to defeat. At its core, orc military philosophy revolves around a simple principle: overwhelming force applied directly at the enemy. Orks have little patience for subtlety or complex maneuvers. They believe, with some justification, that a sufficiently large and powerful attack will overcome any defense. This approach is summed up in the Orkish saying, Mordaka, reflecting their belief that increasing the volume of firepower will eventually solve any tactical problem. This straightforward approach is not without merit. The sheer scale of a WAAAGH means that Orks can absorb casualties that would annihilate other armies. They can afford to send wave after wave against entrenched positions, knowing that eventually the defenders will run out of ammunition, energy, or resolve. This war of attrition favors the Orks, whose numbers seem almost limitless in a full WAAAGH. Furthermore, the Orks' physical attributes support this direct approach. They are naturally tough, strong, and aggressive, making them formidable in close combat. Their biology allows them to survive wounds that would kill humans, and they feel less pain, making them fearless fighters who rarely retreat. These natural advantages mean that even poorly equipped Ork boys can be dangerous opponents in sufficient numbers. While Ork tactics may seem primitive, they are well suited to the species' strengths and to the nature of the WAAAGH itself. The psychic field that strengthens as more Orks gather means that direct, massed attacks actually become more effective as the battle progresses, creating a feedback loop of violence and psychic amplification that can overwhelm even well-prepared defenses. Despite their seemingly chaotic approach to warfare, Orks do possess a form of military organization. The basic unit of Ork society is the mob, a group of Orks led by the biggest and strongest among them. These mobs form the building blocks of larger formations, with bigger Orks commanding multiple mobs and the war boss commanding the entire force. This hierarchy is fluid and constantly changing, as Orks challenge their superiors for dominance. However, during a WAAAGH, the psychic field helps stabilize this structure somewhat, allowing for a greater degree of coordination than might otherwise be possible. The strongest Orks naturally rise to leadership positions, creating a rough meritocracy based on physical prowess and combat skill. On the battlefield, mobs generally operate semi-independently, pursuing objectives assigned by their leaders or simply attacking whatever enemy forces they encounter. This decentralized approach can appear disorganized to outside observers, but it provides significant flexibility, allowing Ork forces to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions without requiring complex command structures. Different types of mobs specialize in different aspects of warfare. Boys form the bulk of any Ork force, serving as infantry with a preference for close combat. Nobs, noble Orks, are larger, stronger Orks who lead mobs and form elite units of their own. Specialized mobs include speed freaks, Orks obsessed with fast vehicles, forming crude but effective motorized units, flashgits, wealthy Orks with expensive, customized weapons who serve as heavy infantry, commandos, rare Orks who have developed a primitive understanding of stealth and tactics, Stormboys, young Orks who adopt a perverse form of military discipline, often equipped with crude rocket packs, looters, Orks who scavenge and use heavy weapons, providing supporting fire. This specialization allows Ork forces to address different tactical situations, albeit in their characteristically direct manner. Speed freaks provide rapid assault capabilities, flashgits bring heavy firepower, commandos can strike vulnerable targets, and so on. The warboss coordinates these different elements, not through detailed battle plans, but through simple, direct orders that play to each mob's strengths and preferences. Despite their seemingly primitive culture, Orks possess a surprising level of technological capability. This technology, created and maintained by specialized orks, known as mechboys, appears ramshackle and unreliable by human standards, but proves remarkably effective in practice. This effectiveness stems partly from the WAAAGH field's influence, but also from the innate mechanical aptitude that seems hardwired into mechboys' genetic makeup. Ork vehicles exemplify this contradictory nature. Their trucks, known as trucks, and tanks, called battle wagons, are cobbled together from salvaged parts, scavenged materials, and crude fabrications. They belch smoke, make alarming noises, and frequently break down when not in combat. Yet in battle, surrounded by the WAAAGH field and piloted by orks who expect them to function, these vehicles prove surprisingly resilient and effective. The same principle applies to ork weapons. Their standard firearm, the shooter, is a crude automatic weapon that, by all reasonable engineering standards, should jam after a few shots. Their heavy weapons, like the big shooter and def gun, appear to be little more than collections of pipes and metal parts. Yet in ork hands, these weapons unleash devastating volumes of fire, embodying the ork principle that quantity has a quality all its own. Perhaps the most extreme examples of ork technology are their largest war machines. These include stompers, massive bipedal war machines that serve as mobile fortresses, armed with a devastating array of weapons, gargants, even larger than stompers. These walking behemoths resemble crude titans, capable of leveling entire city blocks, kill cruisers, ork spacecraft that, despite their apparently slipshod construction, can engage and sometimes defeat Imperial Navy vessels. These massive constructions showcase both the scale of ork ambition and the effectiveness of their technology when empowered by sufficient numbers and belief. A stomper surrounded by thousands of orks, all subconsciously contributing to the psychic field that helps it function, becomes far more than the sum of its poorly welded parts. The tactical implications of ork technology are significant. Their vehicles provide mobility that compensates for the ork's natural tendency toward direct assault. Their heavy weapons bring firepower that can suppress enemy positions, allowing the ork infantry to close to their preferred close combat range. Their war machines serve as both physical and psychological weapons, their imposing presence often breaking enemy morale before a shot is fired. In essence, ork tactics are an extension of their nature, direct, brutal, and overwhelmingly forceful. They lack the subtlety of Elder warfare or the precision of Space Marine operations, but they compensate with raw power, unbridled aggression, and surprising adaptability. A WAAAGH in full flow does not outmaneuver its enemies. It simply crashes over them like a green wave, drowning all resistance in a tide of violence and numbers. When a WAAAGH descends upon a world, the consequences are catastrophic. Unlike some other Xenos threats, who might invade for specific resources or strategic advantages, orks wage war for the sake of war itself. This fundamental difference makes their attacks particularly devastating, as they have no incentive to preserve infrastructure, resources, or populations they might later use. The initial stages of an ork invasion typically begin with space hulks and crude vessels appearing in-system. Speed freaks and commandos may deploy first, conducting raids that disrupt defenses and sow chaos. These preliminary attacks are followed by the main force. Millions of ork boys and their supporting elements crashing onto the planet's surface in drop pods, crude landing craft, or sometimes simply by being fired from massive guns. Once planetside, the orks spread across the landscape like a virulent infection, urban areas become battlegrounds, with buildings demolished by rampaging war machines or crude explosives. Agricultural regions are trampled underfoot or repurposed to grow fungal foods that sustain the Ork population. Industrial zones are seized by mechboys, who convert factories to produce more Orkish weapons and vehicles, often by simply forcing existing workers to create Ork designs. The environmental impact is equally severe. Orks have little concept of pollution or sustainable resource use. Their industry produces toxic byproducts that poison water sources and soil. Their constant fighting tears up landscapes, creates massive craters, and can trigger seismic instability. Most significantly, their spores contaminate the ecosystem at a fundamental level, ensuring that even if the initial invasion is repelled, the world will face recurring Ork infestations for generations. Imperial worlds that have endured a major Ork invasion are often classified as death worlds afterward, requiring constant military presence to contain recurring Ork populations. In some cases, when the contamination is deemed too severe or the strategic value of the world too low, Imperial authorities may resort to exterminators, the complete destruction of the planet's biosphere, as the only certain way to eliminate the Ork presence. Beyond the physical destruction, a WAAAGH inflicts profound psychological trauma on those who experience it. The Orks' combination of physical prowess, numerical advantage, and apparent joy in violence makes them uniquely terrifying opponents. Imperial guardsmen who have faced other Xenos threats often describe Orks as the most psychologically damaging to confront, precisely because the Orks so clearly enjoy the slaughter they inflict. This psychological impact manifests in several ways. During the invasion itself, civilian populations often experience mass panic upon learning of approaching Ork forces. Defense forces may find their morale collapsing when faced with endless green hordes that absorb tremendous casualties without slowing their advance. The distinctive sounds of a WAAAGH, the bellowed battle cry, the crude engines of their vehicles, the constant gunfire of their weapons, create an overwhelming sensory assault that compounds the physical threat. Those who survive an Ork invasion carry deep psychological scars. Post-traumatic stress is common among both military personnel and civilians. Many survivors report recurring nightmares of endless green faces, the distinctive Orkish laughter, and the helplessness of watching defenses crumble before the green tide. Some develop specific phobias related to the Ork appearance or sound, while others suffer from survivor's guilt after witnessing the deaths of comrades and loved ones. Even after an Ork invasion is repelled, the knowledge that their spores remain in the environment creates a persistent anxiety. Citizens of recovered worlds live with the understanding that new Orks may emerge at any time, that any unexplored area might harbor a growing Ork presence. This constant state of vigilance exacts a psychological toll that can last for generations, affecting the culture and society of the world long after the initial WAAAGH has passed. When assessing the threats facing the Imperium of Man, the Orks occupy a unique position. Unlike Chaos, they do not seek to corrupt. Unlike Tyranids, they do not seek to consume all biomass. Unlike Necrons, they do not seek to reclaim ancient territories. The Orks seek only war, endless, joyful combat for its own sake. This seemingly simple motivation makes them both more predictable and more difficult to counter than other Xenos threats. Orks are present throughout the galaxy, from the eastern fringe to the segmentum solar. Their method of reproduction ensures that once they gain a foothold in a region, they become virtually impossible to eradicate completely. they can adapt to almost any environment, thriving in conditions that would kill most species. Their technological requirements are minimal, as they can fashion weapons and tools from almost any materials at hand. This ubiquity means that no region of the Imperium is truly safe from the Ork threat. A world might enjoy centuries of peace, only to face a sudden WAAAGH when a powerful war boss unites local tribes. The resources required to contain even minor Ork infestations drain Imperial military and economic capacity, diverting forces that might otherwise address other threats. The scale of this threat has only increased in recent centuries. The rise of warlords like Ghazghkull Thraka, capable of coordinating activities across multiple sectors, represents an evolution in Ork warfare that poses new challenges for Imperial defense. Some Ordo Xenos inquisitors have begun to speculate that the Orks are returning to the form they held during the War of the Beast, or even to their original Krork state, a prospect that would make them perhaps the most significant threat to galactic civilization. In a galaxy beset by multiple existential dangers, the Orks represent a constant, grinding pressure that weakens defenses against other threats. A world devastated by a WAAAGH becomes vulnerable to chaos corruption, genestealer infiltration, or dark Eldar predation. Imperial military planners must constantly balance resources between containing the ever-present Ork menace and addressing more acute but less ubiquitous threats. Perhaps most concerning of all, the Orks themselves appear to be evolving. Each successive WAAAGH produces larger, more intelligent Orks. Each new war boss seems more capable of strategic thinking than the last. If this trend continues, the future may see Orks reclaiming their ancient role as one of the dominant powers in the galaxy. A prospect that gives even the most hardened Imperial commanders reason to fear. While contemporary Imperial citizens rightly fear Ghazghkull Thraka's WAAAGH, historical records remind us that the galaxy has faced Ork invasions of even greater magnitude. Perhaps the most devastating was the War of the Beast in M32, roughly 1,500 years after the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne. This conflict serves as a chilling reminder of what Orks can achieve when led by an exceptional warlord. The Beast of Olenor, as history records him, was an Ork of unprecedented size and intelligence, standing taller than a Primaris Space Marine in Terminator armor. The Beast possessed not only tremendous physical power, but also strategic acumen that would be impressive in an Imperial general, let alone an Ork. Under his leadership, the Orks developed technology far beyond their usual crude contraptions, including gravity weapons capable of destroying Imperial fleets and even teleporting entire planets into strategic positions. The scale of this WAAAGH dwarfed even the largest modern Ork invasions. The Beast commanded 6 massive attack moons, artificial planetoids that served as mobile fortresses, each led by a prime Ork of extraordinary size and intelligence. These attack moons appeared in multiple systems simultaneously, including Terra itself, demonstrating a mastery of warp travel that Orks typically lack. Imperial worlds fell by the hundreds as the green tide washed across the Segmentum Solar. So dire was this threat that it required the creation of the Death Watch, specialized space marines trained specifically to combat Xenos, and even the deployment of the Primarch Vulcan to finally defeat the Beast. The war lasted decades and brought the Imperium to the brink of destruction, with Terra itself under direct attack. Only through tremendous sacrifice and the leadership of Vulcan was the beast finally slain and his WAAAGH broken. The War of the Beast serves as both historical caution and future warning. It demonstrates that under the right leadership, orcs are capable of evolving beyond their seemingly primitive state to become a threat that can challenge even the heart of the Imperium. The similarities between the beast and modern warlords like Ghazghkull Thraka raise the disturbing possibility that history may be repeating itself. Long before the War of the Beast, the Olana system witnessed another pivotal conflict between humans and orcs. During the Great Crusade, as the Emperor sought to reunite humanity under imperial rule, the Orks of Olanor presented one of the most significant obstacles to this ambition. An Ork empire spanning multiple star systems had established itself in the region, led by a warlord known as Warlords. The campaign to defeat this empire, known as the Olanor Crusade, marked one of the greatest military undertakings of the Great Crusade. The Emperor himself led the assault, accompanied by the Primarchs Horus, Jagatai Khan, and Mortarion, along with their respective Space Marine legions. This concentration of military might underscores the seriousness with which the Emperor viewed the Ork threat. The battle culminated in a direct confrontation between the Emperor and Warlords. Imperial histories record that the Emperor slew the warlord in single combat, breaking the back of the Ork Empire. Following this victory, the Emperor declared the crusade a success and, in a ceremony on Olanor, appointed Horus as War Master before returning to Terra. This moment would have profound consequences for the galaxy, as Horus would later betray the Emperor and plunge the Imperium into civil war. The significance of the Olanor Crusade extends beyond its immediate military consequences. It demonstrated that even at the height of the Imperium's power, with the Emperor and multiple Primarchs leading the assault, the Orks required extraordinary efforts to defeat. Moreover, the later emergence of the beast in the same system suggests that the Orks were not truly eradicated, but merely driven underground, where they eventually reconstituted themselves in an even more dangerous form. In recent centuries, one of the most significant Ork conflicts occurred not against the Imperium, but against another Xenos threat, the Tyranids. The Octarius War, as Imperial observers termed it, began when Commissar Yarrick, seeking a way to contain Ghazghkull Thraka's WAAAGH, suggested to Inquisitor Kryptman that he divert a splinter of Hive Fleet Leviathan toward the Ork-held Octarius sector. Kryptman implemented this strategy, creating what he hoped would be a war of attrition between two of the Imperium's greatest enemies. The resulting conflict exceeded all expectations in its scale and ferocity. Billions of Orks under Warlord Ghazghkull met the Tyranid splinter fleet in a war that has raged for decades, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. The Orks, true to their nature, have thrived in this endless conflict. The constant fighting allows them to grow bigger and stronger, while the need to combat the adaptive Tyranids has spurred innovations in Ork tactics and technology. For their part, the Tyranids have consumed massive quantities of biomass from Orks and adapted their own organisms to better combat the greenskins, developing specialized weapon biomorphs to counter Ork physiology. This war of attrition has had unintended consequences for the Imperium. Rather than containing two threats, it has created a crucible in which both species are becoming stronger and more dangerous. Orks who survive the conflict emerge tougher and more battle-hardened, while Tyranid organisms incorporate useful genetic material from consumed Orks. Imperial strategists now fear that whichever species eventually triumphs will emerge as an even greater threat to humanity. The Octarius War demonstrates a fundamental truth about the Orks. They are one of the few species in the galaxy that genuinely benefits from conflict. Where other races might be worn down by prolonged warfare, Orks grow stronger, both individually and collectively. This biological adaptation to warfare makes them uniquely dangerous in the long term, as strategies designed to weaken them through attrition often achieve the opposite effect. To understand the WAAAGH, one must first understand the biological nature of the Orks themselves. Far from being simply brutish aliens, Orks are sophisticated bioweapons created millions of years ago by the Old Ones to combat the Necrontyr and C'tan. This ancient origin is reflected in their unique physiology, which combines fungal and animal characteristics in a form perfectly adapted for warfare. Orks possess remarkable physical attributes that make them natural warriors. They are incredibly strong, with even the smallest Ork boy capable of overpowering a human soldier. Their muscles continue to grow throughout their lives, particularly when stimulated by combat, allowing successful warriors to reach enormous size. Their green skin contains photosynthetic properties that allow them to absorb solar radiation, reducing their need for food. Their durability is equally impressive. Orks can survive injuries that would kill most other species, including lost limbs, massive blood loss, and even severe head trauma. Their crude nervous system feels pain differently than humans, allowing them to fight on despite grievous wounds. Their bodies can even accept crude bionics and transplants with minimal rejection, enabling pain boys to perform surgical procedures that would be fatal to humans. Perhaps their most remarkable biological feature is their method of reproduction. Orks do not reproduce sexually, but instead release spores throughout their lives, and especially upon death. These spores, invisible to the naked eye, spread through the environment and eventually grow into various orkoid organisms, including squigs, simple creatures used for food and ammunition, snotlings, small, semi-intelligent servants, Gretchen, slightly larger and more intelligent servants, and eventually full Orks. This reproductive method makes Orks virtually impossible to eradicate once they have established themselves on a world. The spores can lie dormant for years before developing, and they are resistant to most conventional decontamination methods. A planet that has experienced an Ork invasion will typically face recurring infestations for generations, requiring constant vigilance and periodic purges to maintain control. One of the most fascinating aspects of Ork biology is their genetic memory, innate knowledge coded into their DNA that gives them instinctive understanding of certain concepts and skills. This genetic memory explains how a species with minimal formal education or training can construct complex machines, wage organized warfare, and maintain a functional, if crude, society. Mech boys exemplify this genetic memory most clearly. These specialized Orks possess an intuitive understanding of mechanical principles that allows them to construct vehicles, weapons, and even spacecraft without formal training or detailed blueprints. They cannot explain how they know what they know. They simply feel an instinctive sense of what will work and what won't. This knowledge isn't perfect. Ork technology is notoriously unreliable, but it's sufficient to create functional war machines that can challenge even sophisticated Imperial technology. Similar genetic memory appears in other specialist Orks. Pain boys know instinctively where to cut and what to replace to keep an injured Ork alive. Weird boys understand how to channel the psychic energy of the WAAAGH without full formal training in psychic disciplines. Even ordinary Ork boys possess innate knowledge of combat techniques and weapons handling that human soldiers would require months of training to master. This genetic memory extends to their social structure as well. Orks instinctively understand the principle that bigger means stronger and therefore more deserving of leadership. They organize themselves into hierarchical tribes without needing to be taught this structure. They recognize the importance of specialized roles within their society and allocate individuals to these roles based on their innate tendencies and abilities. The implication of this genetic memory is profound. The Orks were designed as a self-perpetuating army. Once created, they require no further instruction or guidance to fulfill their purpose as engines of war. They carry within their DNA everything they need to build weapons, organize into effective fighting forces, and wage war across the galaxy. This self-sufficiency makes them one of the most persistent threats in the 40K universe, as they require no supply lines, training facilities, or command structures beyond what they create themselves. A unique aspect of Ork physiology is their ability to grow larger and stronger through combat. Unlike most species, whose physical development is primarily determined by age and nutrition, Orks experience accelerated growth when they fight and win. This biological response to victory creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Successful warriors become physically more imposing, which grants them greater status within Ork society, which in turn gives them more opportunities to fight and grow further. This growth is not merely a matter of increased muscle mass. Orks who survive multiple conflicts develop thicker skin, denser bones, and enhanced nervous systems. Their brain capacity expands somewhat, allowing for greater tactical thinking by Orkish standards. Even their production of spores increases, meaning that successful warriors contribute more to the propagation of their species. The most extreme example of this combat-driven growth is seen in war bosses. These dominant Orks, who have survived countless battles and killed innumerable foes, can reach heights of 3 meters or more. Their strength becomes sufficient to tear apart armored vehicles with their bare hands. Their skin grows so thick that it can resist las fire and even bolter rounds. Their cranial capacity expands to accommodate more complex strategic thinking, though still filtered through the Orkish love of direct confrontation. The biological imperative to grow through combat explains much about Ork behavior. Their constant fighting amongst themselves, which might seem counterproductive, actually strengthens them as a species by ensuring that only the toughest survive to leadership positions. Their preference for close combat, despite possessing ranged weapons, stems from the greater growth stimulus provided by direct physical confrontation. Their willingness to throw themselves against superior firepower reflects not just their courage, but their instinctive understanding that surviving such encounters will make them stronger. In the context of the WAAAGH, this growth mechanism takes on additional significance. As a WAAAGH progresses and Orks experience victory after victory, the entire force grows physically more powerful. Leaders become larger and more dominant, enhancing their control over their subordinates. Specialized Orks develop greater proficiency in their respective fields. The whole WAAAGH becomes more than the sum of its parts, a self-improving war machine that, if left unchecked, can eventually challenge even the most formidable opponents. Ork society operates on a simple principle: the strongest rule. This principle, encoded in their genetics and reinforced by their biology, creates a brutal meritocracy where physical prowess determines social status. The largest and most aggressive orcs naturally rise to leadership positions, while smaller or weaker individuals serve as followers or are eliminated entirely. This might makes right philosophy permeates every aspect of orc culture. Leadership is maintained through constant demonstrations of strength and the ever-present threat of violence. Subordinates obey not out of loyalty or ideology, but from a combination of fear and a genetically programmed respect for physical dominance. Challenges to authority are common, with ambitious orcs seeking to improve their status by defeating their superiors in combat. Despite its brutality, this system creates a surprisingly functional social structure. The strongest orcs, who are typically also the most experienced and battle-hardened, hold positions of authority where their combat experience can benefit the tribe. Specialized orcs like mech boys and pain boys are generally granted a degree of protection due to their valuable skills, allowing them to focus on their areas of expertise rather than constant combat. Smaller orcs and Gretchens find their place as servants and assistants, performing necessary tasks that larger orcs consider beneath them. During a WAAAGH, this hierarchy becomes more formalized. The warlord leading the WAAAGH stands at the apex, with various war bosses commanding sections of the horde. These war bosses, in turn, command numerous nobs, who lead individual mobs of boys. Specialists are distributed throughout this structure, with the most skilled typically serving the highest-ranking leaders. This rough chain of command allows for a degree of coordination that belies the seemingly chaotic nature of orc warfare. The might makes right principle also explains the orcs' approach to other species. They see the galaxy as a testing ground where different races compete for dominance through warfare. In their view, if another species defeats them, that species has proven its strength and earned the right to survive, at least until the next battle. Conversely, if the orcs win, they have confirmed their own superiority and rightfully claimed whatever spoils the defeated had to offer. Perhaps the most alien aspect of orc psychology, from a human perspective, is their genuine enjoyment of warfare. Where humans might fight out of duty, necessity, or ideology, orcs fight because they find it intrinsically pleasurable. Combat is not a means to an end for them, but an end in itself, the activity for which they were created, and the one that gives their lives meaning. This joy in battle manifests in numerous ways. Orcs charge into combat with expressions that humans would interpret as happiness or excitement. They laugh while fighting, a sound that many Imperial Guardsmen describe as the most terrifying aspect of facing orcs in battle. They collect trophies from worthy opponents, not primarily to intimidate others, but as souvenirs of particularly enjoyable fights. They tell and retell stories of great battles, embellishing them with each retelling to emphasize the most exciting moments. The orcish love of violence extends to their recreational activities as well. When not engaged in actual warfare, orcs participate in brutal blood sports, race dangerously unstable vehicles, and engage in friendly brawls that would be considered serious assaults in human society. Even their artistic expressions, crude as they are, typically depict scenes of combat or weapons of war. This psychological orientation toward combat has significant implications for how orcs wage war. They prefer weapons and tactics that maximize their personal involvement in fighting, even when more efficient options might be available. They will choose close combat over ranged weapons, direct assaults over sieges, and individual heroics over coordinated maneuvers. The ideal battle from an Orkish perspective, is not one that achieves strategic objectives with minimal casualties, but one that provides the greatest opportunity for exciting, challenging combat. During a WAAAGH, this joy in battle becomes amplified by the psychic field, creating a feedback loop of violence and pleasure. As more orcs gather and fight, the psychic resonance grows stronger, intensifying their enjoyment of combat. This increased pleasure drives them to fight with even greater ferocity, which in turn strengthens the psychic field further. At the height of a WAAAGH, orcs enter an almost ecstatic state of combat frenzy, fighting with an enthusiasm that borders on the religious. Despite their seemingly primitive nature, orcs maintain a consistent religious belief system centered around two deities, Ghazghkull and Mork. These twin gods embody the orcish ideal of the perfect warrior, with Ghazghkull described as brutally cunning and Mork as cunningly brutal. The subtle distinction between these descriptions is a source of religious debates among orcs, sometimes escalating into full-scale battles between adherents of different interpretations. Orc religion lacks the complex theology or moral codes found in human faiths. Ghazghkull and Mork do not demand worship in the conventional sense, nor do they prescribe specific behaviors beyond the general orcish preference for violence and strength. Instead, they serve as idealized exemplars of orcish virtue, powerful, aggressive, and victorious in all their endeavors. Orcs worship primarily by emulating these traits, proving themselves worthy of their gods through success in battle. During a WAAAGH, the influence of Ghazghkull and Mork becomes more pronounced. The psychic field generated by millions of orcs can produce manifestations that they interpret as divine intervention. Strange phenomena occur. Weapons function better than they should. Orcs survive wounds that ought to be fatal, and occasionally, massive green apparitions resembling the orc gods appear on the battlefield. These manifestations, whether actual psychic entities or simply mass hallucinations induced by the WAAAGH field, reinforce the orcs' religious fervor and drive them to greater acts of violence. Certain orcs claim a special connection to Ghazghkull and Mork. Weird boys who channel the psychic energy of the WAAAGH often describe receiving visions from the twin gods. More significantly, some warlords, like Ghazghkull Thraka, proclaim themselves prophets chosen to lead a divine WAAAGH in the name of Ghazghkull and Mork. These religious claims, when backed by impressive victories and physical prowess, can unite disparate tribes under a single banner, creating WAAAGHs of unprecedented size and strength. The religious dimension of the WAAAGH transforms what might otherwise be simple tribal warfare into a holy crusade. Orcs fight not just for the joy of combat or the glory of their warlord, but for the honor of their gods. This religious motivation helps explain how WAAAGHs maintain momentum over extended periods and across vast distances. The orcs believe they are fulfilling their divine purpose, enacting the will of Ghazghkull and Mork across the stars. Facing an orc represents one of the most daunting challenges for imperial military planners. The combination of overwhelming numbers, physical toughness, and psychological ferocity makes conventional defensive strategies insufficient against a full-scale orc invasion. Nevertheless, over millennia of conflict, the Imperium has developed approaches that can contain, divert, or occasionally defeat orc forces. Early detection forms the cornerstone of Imperial defense against orcs. Once a WAAAGH reaches critical mass, it becomes virtually unstoppable through conventional means. However, in its formative stages, when tribes are still gathering and the warlord is consolidating power, targeted strikes can disrupt the process. Astra Militarum Reconnaissance units and Space Marine scout forces focus on identifying signs of increasing Ork activity, allowing for preemptive action before the green tide fully forms. When preemption fails and a WAAAGH begins in earnest, Imperial strategy shifts to containment and attrition. Planetary defense forces establish fortified positions at strategic locations, supported by heavy weapons emplacements and artillery batteries. These defensive lines aim not to stop the Ork advance entirely, an impossible task against their numbers, but to channel it into killing zones where the greenskins suffer maximum casualties for minimal territorial gain. The Imperial Guard's massive manpower allows it to match Ork numbers to some degree, though typically with heavy losses. Regiments specializing in anti-Ork warfare, such as the Armageddon Steel Legion, employ combined arms tactics. Infantry in mechanized transports, supported by armor and artillery. Maintaining mobile defense that prevents the Orks from bringing their superior close combat abilities to bear. These forces focus on destroying Ork vehicles and leadership figures, hoping to disrupt the WAAAGH's coordination. Space Marines, though too few to counter Ork numbers directly, serve as surgical strike forces targeting key elements of the Ork hierarchy. Kill teams specifically hunt war bosses, knobs, and specialist Orks like mech boys and weird boys, whose loss can fragment larger formations into more manageable mobs. The Death Watch, created specifically for anti-Xenos operations, possesses specialized equipment and tactics for dealing with Ork threats, including Hellfire rounds that combat their rapid regeneration. When conventional forces prove insufficient, the Imperium resorts to more extreme measures. Exterminatus, the complete destruction of a world's biosphere, represents the ultimate response to severe Ork infestation. While devastating, this approach ensures that the Orks cannot establish a permanent presence from which to launch future WAAAGHs. Less extreme, but still dramatic solutions include virus bombs designed specifically to target Orkoid biology, purging a world of greenskins while leaving human populations relatively unaffected. Perhaps the most controversial Imperial strategy involves directing Ork WAAAGHs toward other threats. Inquisitor Kryptman's diversion of Ork forces toward Tyrannid hive fleets exemplifies this approach. By manipulating Ork migration patterns through false information, strategic withdrawals, or tempting targets, Imperial planners can sometimes turn the green tide against other enemies of humanity. This strategy carries significant risks, as evidenced by the Octarius War, but can provide breathing room for beleaguered Imperial forces. Conventional military doctrine proves only partially effective against Orks due to their unique psychology. Unlike human opponents, Orks are not deterred by casualties, demoralized by setbacks, or intimidated by superior firepower. Indeed, they often interpret such challenges as signs of a good fight, making them even more eager to engage. This psychological resilience necessitates specialized approaches that target the peculiarities of the Orkish mind. Commissar Sebastian Yarrick, perhaps the most experienced human commander in anti-Ork warfare, pioneered several such techniques during the defense of Armageddon. Recognizing the Orks' respect for personal strength, Yarrick deliberately cultivated a fearsome reputation through individual heroics and distinctive appearance, including his famous power claw and laser eye. This reputation made Orks hesitate to engage him directly, creating temporary weaknesses in their assault that human forces could exploit. Imperial propaganda targeted at Ork forces emphasizes size and strength, rather than sophisticated messaging. Enormous banners depicting space marines crushing Ork skulls, speakers broadcasting recordings of previous Ork defeats, and displays of captured and destroyed Ork war machines aim to trigger the greenskins' instinctive respect for superior force. While such measures rarely deter an attack entirely, they can influence Ork behavior, directing their aggression towards certain targets and away from others. Understanding Ork superstitions provides another psychological weapon. Orks associate certain colors with particular effects. Red vehicles go faster, blue is lucky, black is tough, purple is stealthy, and so on. Imperial forces sometimes exploit these beliefs by targeting red-painted Ork vehicles first, creating the impression that the fast ones are especially vulnerable. Similarly, Imperial units may adopt color schemes that Orks associate with toughness or luck, hoping to create hesitation in Orkish attackers. The hierarchical nature of Ork society creates another vulnerability. When a dominant Ork is killed, especially in direct combat, those following him often experience momentary confusion as they reassess the chain of command. Elite Imperial units exploit this behavior by specifically targeting nobs and war bosses in the midst of their mobs, creating disruption that ripples through the Ork formation. The death of a warlord, in particular, can fragment an entire WAAAGH as subordinates fight amongst themselves for dominance. Perhaps the most effective psychological tactic against Orks involves redirecting rather than opposing their aggression. Imperial commanders sometimes deliberately leave certain routes undefended, while heavily fortifying others, encouraging the Orks to take the path of least resistance, which leads them into prepared killing grounds or away from critical objectives. This approach acknowledges the impossibility of stopping the green tide entirely, and instead focuses on managing its flow. Even when Imperial forces successfully repel an Ork invasion, their victory remains incomplete. The biological nature of Orks, specifically their spore-based reproduction, ensures that any world touched by their presence faces long-term contamination issues. These spores, microscopic and incredibly resilient, can lie dormant for years before developing into new Orks, creating a persistent threat that requires constant vigilance. The Adeptus Mechanicus, drawing on ancient terraforming technologies, leads efforts to cleanse contaminated worlds. Their approach combines several techniques, each targeting different aspects of Ork biology: controlled burning of large areas to destroy surface spores, chemical agents designed to target and neutralize Ork biological material, radiation treatment that disrupts the development cycle of spores, engineered fungi that compete with Ork spores for resources, specialized servitors programmed to detect and eliminate emergent Orkoids. Despite these efforts, complete eradication of Ork spores proves nearly impossible on most worlds. Instead, Imperial authorities implement long-term containment strategies. Contaminated areas are designated as quarantine zones, with regular patrols to eliminate any Orks that emerge. Urban centers institute spore filtration systems in their air processing units. Agricultural regions employ crop rotation patterns designed to disrupt the Ork life cycle. Despite these precautions, periodic Ork outbreaks remain common on worlds that have experienced a major WAAAGH. The social and economic impact of this contamination is profound. Worlds that might otherwise be productive, Imperial centers become military garrisons, their resources diverted to the constant battle against recurring Ork infestations. Population centers may be abandoned entirely if contamination levels are too high, creating ghost cities that become breeding grounds for future orc tribes. Agricultural output diminishes as farmers must employ anti-orc measures rather than focusing solely on productivity. In extreme cases, when the strategic value of a world justifies the cost, the Imperium may implement planet-wide purging protocols. These methods range from controlled ecological collapse through introduced pathogens to atmospheric incineration using orbital platforms. While effective, such measures render a world uninhabitable for decades or centuries, requiring extensive terraforming before human recolonization becomes possible. The persistent nature of orc contamination represents perhaps their most insidious threat to the Imperium. Even defeated, even broken, the orcs remain, their spores waiting patiently in the soil until conditions allow them to emerge once more. In this way, every war leaves a legacy that extends far beyond the immediate destruction it causes, a green shadow that may hang over a world for generations to come. As the 41st millennium progresses toward its end, the orc threat shows signs of not diminishing but evolving. Recent observations by Ordo Xenos inquisitors indicate disturbing trends in orc development, suggesting that the greenskins may be entering a new phase in their species' history, one that could make them even more dangerous than they already are. The most obvious indication of this evolution appears in the physical size of dominant orcs. Ghazghkull Thraka stands significantly larger than most Warhammer war bosses of previous centuries, and his subordinate commanders similarly exceed historical norms. This growth trend extends beyond just the leadership caste. Average orc boys in Ghazghkull WAAAGH are noticeably larger and stronger than their counterparts from a millennium ago. More concerning than mere physical size is the apparent increase in orcish intelligence and organization. Modern WAAAGH display levels of coordination that would have been impossible in earlier eras. Orc forces now employ rudimentary but effective strategies, timing their attacks to coincide with Imperial vulnerabilities, targeting critical infrastructure rather than simply engaging the nearest enemy, and even conducting feint attacks to draw defenders away from their true objectives. Technological development among the orcs has accelerated as well. Mech boys produce more sophisticated weapons and vehicles than their predecessors, incorporating scavenged technology from other species with greater effectiveness. Some reports describe orc voidcraft capable of limited warp travel without relying on captured navigators, suggesting a significant leap in their technological capabilities. The appearance of stompers and gargants in greater numbers indicates improved manufacturing capacity and resources. Perhaps most disturbing is the emergence of what some xenobiologists term prime orcs, individuals who combine enormous size with unprecedented intelligence and leadership abilities. Ghazghkull represents the most prominent example, but others have been identified across the galaxy. These exceptional orcs bear uncomfortable similarities to descriptions of the Beast of Eleanor and his lieutenants, raising the possibility that the species is returning to a form not seen since that catastrophic conflict. Magos biologist theorists propose several explanations for this evolutionary surge. Some suggest that the constant warfare of the 41st millennium has accelerated the orcs' combat-driven growth process, creating selection pressure that favors larger, smarter individuals. Others point to the psychic awakening affecting many species in the galaxy, which may be enhancing the orcs' latent psychic abilities and the WAAAGH field they generate. Still others, more controversially, propose that the orcs' original creators programmed this evolution into their genetic code, designing them to adapt to increasing threats over time. This theory gains credibility from observations of how Ork activity intensifies in regions where a single power grows too strong. WAAAGHs seem to emerge with suspicious timing, targeting ascendant forces just as they approach critical mass. During the Great Crusade, as the Emperor's forces expanded rapidly across the stars, they encountered increasing Ork resistance, culminating in the massive empire at Ullanor. In the current era, as the Imperium fragments under multiple pressures, Ork activity has redoubled, perhaps in response to the growing influence of chaos and other Xenos powers. If this theory holds true, the ultimate fate of the Orks may be to serve as the galaxy's eternal counterbalance, never achieving dominance themselves, but preventing any other species from doing so either. They would represent not a conventional threat to be defeated, but a fundamental constant in the galactic equation, as inevitable and inescapable as entropy itself. A more apocalyptic interpretation comes from certain radical inquisitors who have studied both Ork biology and the War of the Beast. They suggest that the current evolution of the Orks, particularly the emergence of prime Orks like Ghazghkull Thraka, represents the beginning of a transformation programmed into their genetic code. This transformation, if completed, would restore the Orks not merely to the level of the beast, but to their original form as Krorks, the full realization of the Old One's weapon design. True Krorks, according to fragmentary records from the War in Heaven, stood taller than modern Imperial Knights. They possessed technology comparable to that of the ancient Eldari Empire, including energy weapons that could shatter planets and shields that could withstand the fury of a star. Their society, while still built around warfare, displayed levels of organization and coordination that made them a match for the Necron legions at the height of their power. If modern Orks were to complete their evolution and return to this form, no current galactic power could stand against them. The Green Tide would become a green singularity, a military force of such overwhelming might that it would sweep all opposition before it. The galaxy would enter a new age, dominated not by ancient species like the Eldari or Necrons, nor by upstarts like humanity, but by the green-skinned inheritors of the Old One's final legacy. Which of these futures will come to pass? Will the Orks remain the eternal counterweight, forever fighting but never winning the ultimate victory? Or will they complete their programmed evolution and rise to become the dominant species of the next galactic epoch? Only time will tell. But one thing remains certain. As long as there are stars in the sky and worlds to conquer, the battle cry of the WAAAGH will echo through the void, and the green tide will continue to rise. The Orks of Warhammer 40,000 represent one of the most unique and compelling Xenos threats in science fiction. Unlike antagonists motivated by religious fervor, territorial expansion, or simple hunger, the Orks fight because fighting is what they were made for and what they enjoy most. This singular purpose makes them simultaneously simpler and more complex than other species. Simpler in their motivations, yet more complex in their resilience and adaptability. The WAAAGH stands as the ultimate expression of the Orkish nature. It is at once a military campaign, a migration, a psychic phenomenon, and a religious crusade. It transforms disparate tribes into a unified force capable of challenging the most powerful armies in the galaxy. It channels the Orks' natural aggression and love of combat into a green tide that can sweep across entire sectors, leaving devastation in its wake. From the smallest grot to the mightiest war boss, from the crude slugger to the towering gargant, Everything about the Orks is designed for war. Their biology allows them to survive wounds that would kill other species and grow stronger through combat. Their psychology finds joy in violence and respects strength above all. Their technology, while appearing primitive, proves remarkably effective when empowered by their collective psychic field. Even their religion celebrates the ideal of the perfect warrior, eternally victorious in endless battle. For the Imperium of Man and other galactic powers, the Orks represent not merely another enemy, but a fundamental force of nature that must be continuously contained and managed. Like a force of gravity or a law of thermodynamics, the green tide cannot be permanently defeated, only temporarily redirected or locally diminished. The spores remain, the cycle continues, and eventually, the WAAAGH rises again. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Orks alone find reason to smile. For war is what they love, what they were made for, and what they shall have until the last star burns out. And in a universe of ancient evils, cosmic horrors, and soul-consuming gods, perhaps there is something almost refreshing about an enemy who fights not out of hate or hunger, but out of simple, uncomplicated joy in the battle itself. So the next time you hear the rumble of crude engines, the rattle of shoddily constructed weapons, and the rising roar of a million green throats bellowing, WAAAGH, in unison, know that you are witnessing one of the fundamental forces of the 40K universe in action. The green tide rising once more to engulf the stars in its eternal joyous battle.